And just the general Beatlemania was, it took its toll. And also because we were seeing it then from as no longer as like naive kind of, just on the buzz of our fame and success.
We might have been waxworks for half what the good we did there. Nobody heard anything, or not even, a basic beat, I don't think. They were too busy tearing each other up.
I don't think anyone didn't want to stop touring. Probably Paul would have gone on longer than George and I.
Generally, it's how much of a good thing can you have? How long can you sustain things? And every tour we'd just gone great, just gone marvellous. But we were getting a bit fed up anyway, just because we've been at it so long. And it gets grueling, and another holiday in after another. You know that. We all know that one.
We were just tired, it had been, 4 years for us of legging around, screaming in this mania. We were tired, we needed a rest.
Are the Beatles going to go their own ways in 1967? They could be, on our own or together. We're always involved with each other, whatever we're doing.
Do have you got tired of each other?
No.
No? Yeah? If you never toured again, would it worry you?
I don't know. No, I don't think so.
Do you think that in the new year that you're going to be going your own ways instead of being a group?
No.
No?
No, George, definitely not.
But it was going to be a record that was going to be made in the studio, and it was going to be songs which they had written, which couldn't be performed live. They were designed to be studio productions, and that was the difference.
Well, really, it was Paul who'd been on a train journey or a plane journey with Mal Evans and come up with this idea of Sgt. Pepper, and he was just kind of, to me, we were just in the studio to make the next record, and he was going on about this idea of, some fictitious band.
Sgt. Pepper's Paul after a trip to America, and the whole West Coast long-named group thing was coming in. When people were no longer the Beatles or the Crickets, they were suddenly treading these incredible shrinking Grateful aeroplanes, right?
I was coming back on a plane, and I was with our roadie, Mal. He said, "We pass the salt and pepper." And he said, "Salt and pepper." I said, "What?" He said, "Salt and pepper." And I thought he said Sgt. Pepper. I said, "That's great. Wait a minute, hold that right there." So that was the idea planted. And then, because I'd been listening to all this sort of alternative music, I thought, wait, what about that for an idea? We'll pretend we're another band when we make this album. And the idea was, when you walk up to the microphone, John, you won't be John Lennon. You'll be a guy out of this group, so you can do anything you want.
And so Sgt. Pepper kind of eventually came out, basically from the idea that I had about this band. It was going to be an album of another band that wasn't us. We were going to call ourselves, and just imagine all the time that it wasn't us playing this album. And it was just a nice little mind warp to get you to see the album, because when you're too close, it lent distance to the album. So I had this song written of Sgt. Pepper, and he was 20 years ago, and he taught us to play, and we're his protégés, and here we are. And then John had some good songs that he'd been writing at the time, Day in the Life, and to mention a few. And we worked on those and finished those, and George wasn't very involved in that album. He just had one song, really. It's really the only time during the whole album, main time, I remember him turning up.
Penny Lane was a place that John knew about. So, for me to just say I've got a song called Penny Lane, he knew exactly what I was doing. Similarly, Strawberry Fields, I knew about that from when I used to go and visit him when we were kids. It was the place right opposite him where he used to go and play in the garden kind of thing. So it was kind of a magical childhood place for him. And we transformed it into the sort of psychedelic dream. It's like everybody's magic place instead of just ours. We took them from being little localized things to made them more global.
The reason that Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane didn't appear on the album was that Brian Epstein, their manager, was worried and said to me, "The boys need a lift, they need a great single, what have you got?" Well, I said we've got two wonderful songs, let's issue them both. In those days, we didn't include single releases and albums, as we thought that was rather conning the public. One of the biggest errors I ever made.
By the time we came to make Sgt. Pepper, we were getting a lot more freedom, artistic freedom. So we started to incorporate more of the kind of crazy life that we were living at the time into the music.
A lot of the time was spent actually just trying to get sounds and trying to find sounds, invent them. Nowadays, it's pretty easy because, in fact, it's too easy. There's so many sounds available just by hitting a button. And all these machines that, because of some of those records in the 60s, they've invented machinery where you just switch it on and you instantly get an effect, which is something that we were trying to discover in us.
Basically, Paul's idea to call Pepper, he came in and said, you know, he had this song, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and he was kind of identifying it with the band, the Beatles themselves. And I think we recorded the song first, and then the idea came to make it into an idea for the album, which was also triggered by Neil Aspinall, who said at that time,
why don't we have Sgt. Pepper as the compa? You know, he comes on at the beginning of the show, introduces the band, right? And then at the end of every Beatles show, Paul always used to say, it's, you know, it's time to go, you know, we gotta go to bed and, you know, this is our last number. You know, do the last number and go. And I said to Paul, why doesn't Sgt. Pepper come on at the end of the album and say, you know, well, that's it, we've got to go, you know, here's our last number, right? And send the album on tour instead of the band, right? So we liked that idea.
I mean, it was Sgt. Pepper and his Lonely Hearts Club Band and all these other acts. And it was going to all run, you know, like the rock opera. And we got as far as Sgt. Pepper and then Billy Shears. A little help from my friends, and then everyone said, sod it, let's just do tracks. So it started out with its own, you know, that it was going to be something totally different, but it still then kept the title and like also the feel that it's all connected.
John and Paul always wrote a song for Ringo in every album. With a little help from my friends, proved to be the song. And Paul wrote that song and wrote it beautifully simply with just 5 notes that Ringo had to carry, all within one little phrase of which was all in those notes.
It took a lot of coaxing from Paul to get me to sing that last note. I just felt it was very high. I always worry about the vocals, you know, and I'm insecure when I do the vocals. I still am, and I was then. And so he would, you know, get me up, and we finally got that last note.
It's called the first concept album. It doesn't go anywhere. Mr. Kite, all my contributions have absolutely nothing to do with this idea of Sgt. Pepper and his band. But it works, because we said it worked, and that's how it appeared. Otherwise, every other song could have been on any other album.
Right. The real story about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was I showed up at John's house one day, and he said to me, look at this great drawing Julian's just done. And he showed me, I remember it very well. It was a kid's drawing, and kids always have people floating around like Chagall does and all these things. They're always just floating. I think it's just something to do with the kids don't realise people have to be put on the ground.
I've seen the painting that this little kid does. I don't know if you've got kids, you know, but they just slap paint everywhere and say it's a painting.
John had said, what's it called then? And Julian had said, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
They were able to conjure up a wonderfully evocative image with very sparse material. And the opening to Lucy is a really case in point. It's a most wonderful phrase. I think, you know, if Beethoven had been around, he wouldn't have minded one of those. And over that very, very simple and beautiful phrase, John sang just one note. He developed it. I mean, he had a way of finding out what he wanted to sing, even as we were recording. But to begin with, all he sang was, "Picture yourself on a boat on a river."
The climate was influenced by the psychedelic era. If you could go back to the period and everyone could understand how the period was and kind of how innocent it was, then it is easier to talk about it.
Paul, how often have you taken LSD?
4 times.
It mightn't have affected creativity for other people. I know it did for us, and it did for me. I mean, the first thing, that people who smoked marijuana and were into music is that somehow it focuses your attention better on the music, and so you can hear it clearer.
We found out very early on that, if you played stoned or derelict in any way, it was really shitty music, So we would have the experiences and then bring that into the music later.
So I knew that the boys smoked pot, and they equally knew that I disapproved. And they never did in front of me. They would always have Mal roll them a joint, and they'd nip out into the canteen and lock it, or else go into the loo and have a smoke and come back again, beaming all over their faces. The next song we did actually was When I'm 64, but that was one that harked back.
I mean, when I started songwriting, it wasn't to write rock and roll. It was to write for Sinatra. It was to write cabaret. In fact, one of my first songs was When I'm 64. And so you weren't, your aims weren't set to sort of doing rock and roll. But when we started working together, I think I certainly, and I think John too, wanted to be a Rodgers and Hammerstein, a Lennon McCartney. We consciously wanted to be, a team. I mean, the funny thing was I wanted McCartney-Lennon, but of course John was always bossier, and he said, no, it sounds much better the other way, McCartney, Lennon-McCartney. So I gave in.
I was getting ready to go out to the session, and a guy knocked on my door, and I said, yeah, I didn't recognize him. I said, who are you? He said, I'm Jesus. So, better come in then. I said, you want a cup of tea? I thought, well, got to treat him right. You never know, he just... So it was fine, and I was chatting away, and he seemed like a great bloke and that. So I said, do you want to come to a session? He said, yeah. I said, you'll have to be very quiet and just sit in a corner, though. So I went around, I just sort of said, this guy, he says he's Jesus, I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. Is it okay if he sits in the corner? So he sat there for the session on Fixing the Hole. We just made the record and said good night. I've never seen him since.
When George brought up the Within You Without You, and nobody was there going, oh, George, we don't really want any Indian music on this album. We're a rock and roll. It was like, yeah, come on, let's see what happens, So, liberating was a good word for it.
Within You Without You was just my way of trying to make a Western pop song using some of those instruments and some of those sounds.
We all knew George liked Indian music, and there was a kind of toleration, if you like. But it was a welcome one, because we actually liked the sounds. So the joss sticks even were okay. They covered the smell of pot.
I remember we walked into an antique shop in Sevenoaks in Kent, and we were looking at what they had there, and John pulled out this thing that he found, which said The Benefit of Mr. Kite, and it was virtually all the lyrics to that song.
When I saw it, it was hanging up in the hall of his house in Surrey, and it had everything that the song has on it. It had the Henderson Twins and Pablo Fanke's Fair, and all those words were written on the poster. And he thought it obviously inspired him to write a song about a fairground or circus.
That's how you do it. You get ideas, you hear people say stuff, or you hear a phrase that sounds good and you write it down and remember it. So I think he was just advanced for those days. in his awareness of putting everything could be put into a song, you know.
He wanted to create a sound picture of what the song was all about. And he actually said to me, I want to smell the sawdust. But to get the smell of the sawdust, John and I, both sat on different organs, Wurlitzers and Lowrys and Hammonds, and with double speed techniques created a kind of whirly atmosphere.
It took a long time, and it took longer for me because I would do the basic track. We would do the basic backing track, which would do the drums, and then it would be days or weeks and even months sometimes to come back to the track and put on, you know, overdub like the hi-hat, or if there's, you know, listening again, there's lots of conga drums. You know, I'm not a percussionist, you know, that's another field of drums, but I'm on playing the congas, and there's lots of maracas, and all that stuff sort of came on at the end. So there was a lot of huge gaps. You know, the biggest memory I have of Sgt. Pepper is I learned to play chess on it.
So it had two stories. One was the Guinness child had killed himself in a car. That was the main headline story. On the next page was about 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
It was mainly a John song, and he had the, I read the news today, oh boy. And he'd taken a lot of it from a newspaper.
There's one great moment with John, who played a record to me, wanted me to, well, play it like that, Ring. And I said, well, John, there's two guys. He says, well, don't let that bother you.
The first part of the song, A Day in the Life, was John's, but it was incomplete. He went to Paul and said, have you got anything to pad it out in the middle? Paul had another song which he was working on.
And then I had another bit. Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. That was a little bit I had, but wasn't doing anything. And so we thought, well, that'd be good.
We connected them with a series of empty bars on either side of Paul's section before we came back into John's as a reprise. And we knew we had to fill those bars with something sensational. And we didn't know what it was going to be yet.
And I'd learned the chords off him and we'd develop it. But the moment I remember was when we got to a little bit that he didn't have, where we sort of said, I'd love to turn you on. And we looked at each other and said, we know what we're doing here, don't we? We're actually saying for the first time ever, words like turn you on, you know, and which was in the culture anyway, but no one had actually said it on record yet. And there was a little sort of look of recognition between us, like, do it, get it down.
So, you know, the sleeve came and we wanted to dress up and we wanted to be these people, you know, the Peppers. And, you know, let's get suits and, you know, it was flower power. I mean, coming into its fullest. You know, that's what it was.
We started to realize that there weren't as many frontiers as we'd thought there were, and that we could break barriers in things like album covers and stuff, you know. I mean, we would never have considered doing something like that a few years earlier.
When the boys decided what they wanted really to put all of their heroes on the album in some form or another. And by recruiting Peter Blake, who was an avant-garde artist again, to assemble their ideas and realize them in the same way that I was realizing the music, they did, I think, a pretty smart thing.
There was a bit of a dispute about this cover, you know, everyone was kind of, oh, we can't do that, you know. Because that's the thing, if you're being free, there's obviously a lot of people say, oh, you know, naughty, watch it.
Mae West wrote back and said, what would I be doing in the Lonely Hearts Club? No, I won't be on it. So then I think it was suggested that the Beatles all wrote her a personal letter and said, we'd very much like you to be on it. Then she said, yes, she would.
The idea somewhere, like on a... That was the whole idea. The cover was supposed to... Originally, the cover was going to be us, dressed as this other band in kind of crazy gear, but it was all going to be stuff that we'd always wanted to wear, all stuff that, like, we always secretly really liked, and it may have been there. And we were going to have photos on the wall, which were all our heroes. And it could be anything. It could be Marlon Brando in his leather jacket, or it could be Einstein. It could be anybody we'd all ever thought, oh, he was good. And it was going to be this band and all their cult heroes. And we kind of put this other identity on them to do it. And that was how it turned out. You know, the cover got changed a lot, you know, in the process. But that was the basic idea behind it, yeah, kind of fantasy show, you know.
I think it did represent what the young people were on about, and it seemed to coincide with a revolution in young people's thinking, and it was the kind of, I suppose, the epitome of the swinging 60s. It sort of linked up with Mary Quantum, miniskirts and all that kind of thing, and dope to a certain extent. You know, the freedom of sex, the freedom of soft drugs like marijuana and so on. I suppose that was all a bit exciting, and I think it did reflect its time.
I thought it was great. I thought it was a huge advance. I was very pleased because the newspapers, the musical papers, had been saying recently, a month or two before, what are the Beatles up to? Drying up, I suppose. And so it was nice making an album like Pepper, thinking, yeah, drying up, that's that. I suppose that's right, yeah. So it was lovely to have that on them, you know.
Well, Sgt. Pepper for me was great because it's a fine album. It's a fine album, but I did learn to play chess on it because I'd have so much spare time, you know. We'd do the basic track and then we'd put other stuff on and then the percussion would be overdubbed later and later, you know.
Wasn't that spectacular? I mean, when you look back on it, I mean, like anything, it was great then. But people just have this dream about Pepper. It was good for then, you know.
Well, we worked together for almost a decade, and the role changed somewhat. I mean, to begin with, I was the master and they were the pupils. At the end, I think I was the pupil and they were the masters. During the Pepper period, it was my function was to try and extract from them the maximum of their talent and try and find out what they wanted to hear.
I think that period felt special because there was a great upsurge of energy and consciousness, and because there was so much attention given to not just the Beatles, but to everything that was taking place, all the changes that were happening with fashion and with filmmakers and poets and painters and the whole thing. It was like a sort of mini renaissance. And so there was a lot of excitement on the street. There was a lot of people who were all trying to go on the same trip together.